Well, out of control. Out of control. You're not out of control. I'm not out of control. The producer, Mr. Cat, isn't out of control. But we do have a problem. Corporate welfare is out of control in this country. We've now reached phase 3 of the corporate welfare superhighway to the federal treasury. The third lane is being rapidly built. Now, a few weeks ago, could have even been a week before last, I made some comments about corporate welfare. I talked about direct government grants to the corporate sector. That's right, direct government grants. While people are struggling to pay their mortgage and service their debts and pay their rent, we see billions of dollars of direct government grants going to the corporate sector. Then we have the ridiculous situation that we have legislation in place which rewards people with assets and punishes those without them. Obviously, the recent research, and I could have done that research with my eyes closed, has highlighted how wealth distribution in this country has been skewed in the direction of the corporate sector. Now, anybody who actually does any shopping or pays bills can actually see that although there are inflationary pressures, these inflationary pressures are directly related to company profitability. And it's all about shareholder returns. But we now have a new phase to the corporate welfare gravy train. A new wagon has been added to the corporate gravy train. And that is the payment, that's right, the payment of wages by the taxpayer to maintain dying privatisation assets in corporate hands alive. Now, the last 45 years we've been through a significant economic turnaround. We've seen, as I've said before on many occasions, we've seen most of the gains of the late 19th century and the first half of the 20th century disappear through privatisation, through globalisation, through corporatisation, through deregulation. We've seen them disappear. We've seen all those essential services which were publicly owned and publicly held and cross-subsidised services to the people of this country going to private hands. We've seen ridiculous legislation which has allowed the private sector to exploit both its customers and workers. But it's gone one step further. Now, I had to laugh a few days ago when I was listening to a representative of the early childhood development sector. And let's not forget, the early childhood development sector, like the aged care sector, has almost been 100% privatised. Championing a wage rise for early development workers. And I thought, this is strange. Where's the catch? What's going on? Here's a corporate employer that employs over 10,000 people in the early childhood development sector who is begging that his workers receive a wage rise. And I'm thinking, that's nice. Then the cat is let out of the bag. This is the first new collective bargaining campaign which has been endorsed by the Fair Work Commission. And the corporations which dominate the early childhood development sector, who have a superhighway, a 2-lane superhighway to the Federal Treasury, are now demanding that a third lane to that highway be added. And that is that you and me, the taxpayer, pay for, that's right, pay for any wage increases to their workers. No wonder this representative of the early childhood development sector was crowing about the fact that they're supporting the early childhood development staff's application for a wage rise in the Fair Work Commission with this new enterprise bargaining agreement, as long as any wage increases are covered by the taxpayer. Extraordinary. I couldn't understand how the interviewer hadn't fallen on the ground killing themselves laughing. This is an extraordinary state of affairs. We saw it recently, and we let it go through to the keeper. With COVID-19, and the major impact of COVID-19 was on the over 70s, and that major impact was in nursing homes and aged care facilities, and the death rate was highest in that age bracket in those facilities. And we saw aged care workers who were paid miserable amounts, in many regards very close to the basic wage, around $18 to $20 an hour, being given a 25% increase, and that wage rise was actually paid for by the taxpayer. This was about 6 months ago. We accepted that. A one-off in an extraordinary situation with a labour shortage and inability or unwillingness of people to work for peanuts in these high tension atmospheres. Most of us felt, well, this is reasonable, we're happy to help out. Now, obviously, what this highlights is what we all knew, but were unwilling to say. There are some services which are needed, which are necessary in a community, whether it's energy security, whether it's early childhood development, whether it's schooling at a primary, secondary or tertiary level, whether it's healthcare, that are not suitable to privatisation. Every time a public asset is privatised, not only are any profits which are made by that public asset removed from the Federal Treasury, putting extra pressure on taxpayers to meet the difference, but at the same time we are seeing that services are decreasing in those sectors. And if you look at all the Royal Commission findings that have been made over the last decade regarding privatised public assets which are not delivering services, which are not fit for purposes, every Royal Commissioner has lamented the fact that these enterprises cannot deliver services to their clients, look after their staff, if they need to maximise profits every year, ever increasing profits for their major shareholders. So this privatisation experiment has failed dismally. Now, in an attempt for the private sector to survive in these essential services, they are now demanding demanding that we, the taxpayer, pay for any wage increases to their staff. This is just totally out of control. Totally out of control. And it has occurred because as a people, over 95% of the population have accepted, maybe not agreed, but accepted these changes because they have believed, and it is a belief system like any religion, the worship of Mammon is just another belief system, that through privatisation you will improve services, decreased costs, and what they've forgotten is the elephant in the room, and is that the fact that when you privatise a sector, initially you may have hundreds of small companies competing to provide those services, keeping a lid on prices. But as the superhighway to the federal treasury gets better and better, we see corporations move into these sectors, put the small business elements of that sector out of business, and then hold the population hostage. That's right, hold the population hostage, because they're the only ones providing essential service and they're too big to fail. And we see it over and over and over again. So, what do we need to do? It's all very well for me to analyse the situation, but ultimately I have no power. The only power I have is the power to influence, the power to lay the question bare, the power to look at the situation from a different light, from a different position, from a different ideological position. And as the registered officer of public interest before corporate interests, it's my job to ensure that the public interest is always put before the corporate interest, and that means the interest of the many is put before the interests of the few. But obviously, while we as a people, as a population, accept the furphy, the lie, the misinformation, that the private sector provides the best services, we will continue to have our wealth stolen. We will continue to see the commonwealth be given over by our political representatives in Parliament at the state and especially the federal level to that sector. And this latest attempt to get Australian taxpayers, and let's not forget that almost 70% of every dollar that is raised in tax comes from pay as you earn taxpayers. It doesn't come from the business sector, it doesn't come from the corporate sector, it doesn't come from the revenue which is raised from excise on alcohol and tobacco. It comes from the pay as you earn taxpayer. And irrespective of the changes to the taxation system will be brought in a year or so time, the fact is that we bear the bulk of the responsibility. And our responsibility as a people is not to maximise profits for corporations who dominate essential services, who have continued to make extraordinary profits at the expense of their workers and their clients, and expect us to stand by the sideline, Royal Commission after Royal Commission, tut-tutting, saying, it's all too hard, we can't do anything about it, You can't fight City Hall. There's no point. It's overwhelming. It's too much. Put me head down. I'll get a second job. I'll sell an asset. I'll sell my home because I can't pay the mortgage. I'll refuse to, I'll leave my current rental lodgings and move to something cheaper, move out on the street. It's all too hard. We can't change anything. Well, that type of attitude is what allows the small section of the population that owns the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, and the investment class in this country, about 9% of the population, to get away with murder, to keep adding lanes to the superhighway to the Federal Treasury, to steal your money, to provide substandard, inadequate services as well as goods to people as a whole. We need fundamental change. We need the revitalisation of the public sector. We need the ownership of the public sector to be placed in the Australian Constitution, so future governments cannot sell everything that hasn't been nailed down. Obviously, Mr. Andrews, a member, the leader of the socialist left faction of the Victorian Labor Party, is now retired. What was his major contribution? What was Victorian LP's major contribution? Maybe they removed a few railway crossings, built some tunnels, but ultimately this was done at the privatisation of some of the most essential services in the state of Victoria. The ports, the public housing sector, the titles office, the road traffic authority, and the list goes on and on and on. And this will continue to happen unless we say enough is enough. The only way to stop an out-of-control car is to put a brick wall in front of it. Obviously there'll be casualties of the people in that car, but the rest of the population won't have to bear the consequences of that out-of-control car. And it's the same with the economy. A corporate sector which is so out of control, which is so fat on government money, which has colonised the public service at the state and federal level, which is only interested in maximising profits, irrespective of the human, social, environmental costs, needs to be stopped in its tracks. And that's why I encourage you to join public interests before corporate interests. It's very easy. You can do it online. You can leave a message on 0439 395 489. If we refuse to do anything, we will continue to see lane after lane after lane added to the superhighway which connects this country's corporations to the Federal Treasury.